Welcome to season 8 of a Vietnam podcast, sharing the stories of people connected to Vietnam. My name is Niall Mackay, and I've been living in Vietnam since 2016 and hosting this podcast since 2019. I wanted to know more about the people that lived in Vietnam, both locals and foreigners, and share their story. My guest today is French-Vietnamese, a host of Creators in Vietnam podcast and Coach-sultant for young professionals. We'll share today why they left France to come to Vietnam via Canada, what is a Coach-sultant exactly, more about the Creators in Vietnam podcast, and talk more about his journey battling a drug addiction. My guest today is Tue-Si Nguyen. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Neil. Thank you. Great intro. Yeah. This is so fun.
Well, Thank you very much. I mean, well, it's great to have you on. So I recently featured on your podcast, Creators in Vietnam, which was similar to mine. We started as a Saigon podcast. You guys started as Creators in Saigon and then branched out as well, Creators in Vietnam, which made total sense. So tell us a little bit about Creators in Vietnam podcast, how it started, and maybe some of our listeners might already know a little bit, but tell us more about that.
So the purpose of Creators in Vietnam right now is to interview people that are creating a positive impact in their community or their own lives. So that's we're using the word creators as creating that positive impact. And so we're not looking at only content creators, but people that are, creating businesses with meanings, with impact behind it, creating any type of charity, volunteers, or anything like this. Right now, we're on our unofficially third season of the podcast. I think it changes with every host. So originally the podcast was actually created by Dana Drejo. So shout out to Dana as Creators in Saigon. And then I joined in at the end of 2020 with another host called Nicolas. So shout out to Nicolas too. And so the three of us, did a whole season of that. And it was quite fun. At that time, I wanted to do a podcast because I really like my voice and I wanted to create content. And I was a little bit too afraid of video because it really triggered me and I would stutter and I would get so self-conscious. So when Dana presented the occasion of taking back Creators in Saigon and creating just voice content, I was like, yeah, cool. My voice puts my girlfriend to sleep, so I can put people to sleep with this soothing voice. And then unfortunately, Dana had to go back to the States and I couldn't let the podcast die. So I was like, how about I take it back? And then we went and looked for another host, and that's where Moni came in. And that's when we started the third season of it. And I think you were, after Connor, you were our second episode for that season. So it was quite enjoyable to interview you. And there is not that many podcasts in Saigon and in Vietnam to start with in English. So it's good to form this type of community where all of us know each other and we can help each other. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had someone ask me before, oh, is it are you guys competitive? And I was like, no, not at all. The more people that listen to the podcast, the better. I'm not trying to take away this. It's not that big a medium in the first place. It's not like you're trying to take away listeners from each other. You're all trying to build yourself up. Yeah. And I remember when we started back in 2019, me and Dana were starting at almost the exact same time. And I think at that time, there was really only the Saigoneer podcast, which is still going, not much more. But then at the time, there was a whole, a burst of all these podcasts started around 2019. Some of them have faded away, but it's so exciting to see the medium as you mentioned, kind of the English language is quite small. But if you look at the podcast charts, the amount of podcasts in Vietnamese is huge.
Yeah. We've interviewed the DRR community, Kelly. She's doing an amazing job. I'm loving this, and again, we're definitely not competing. And if anything, you're the beacon for me, where I'm like, oh wow, Neil is creating out of this. He has Patreon, and he has merch, and I was like, yes, Neil, show me the way. I'll just follow behind.
I mean, and it's just, I'm just doing the same as well with other people. You just see what other people are doing, and it's the same thing, right? But it is really cool. Great. I mean, and you do see things like that. You see people oh yeah, they've done that. So I'm like, that's cool. They're doing the same as me. That's cool. But we're all trying to help each other. Now, to go back a step though, you're the only person I've ever heard say they like the sound of their own voice.
I've learned to like the sound of my voice. At the beginning, no, very honestly, I say that as a joke because it's like a pick me up a little bit. But the first episode when I recorded it, I couldn't listen to my voice. I was like, oh, what is this horrible? Like a lot of people say I have a Filipino accent because like with me, like I grew up in France and I lost the French accent. It's still there, but it's this dirty kind of Filipino accent now, and it's like. And then with my face, people are like, "Yeah, you're definitely Filipino." And
Well, now
so,
you've,
and
I
I
hadn't
didn't,
thought that. But now
yeah.
you've
The
said it,
when
I'm
you
like, I
hear
can
it, you
hear
change.
it. Yeah, and I'm like, oh yeah. Well, and I met with I think a mutual friend of ours, Annie, right? Who's friends with Moni, and he's also from
Yeah.
Hungary, Hungarian Vietnamese. And I met with her
Mm-hmm.
just this week, and I said to her, I was like, you sound Filipino now. Which before the first time I
Yeah.
spoke to her, I said to her right away, I was like, you have an accent, where are you from? And she's like, Hungary. And I was like, oh my goodness, same as Moni. And she's like, yeah, I know Moni and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, then when I spoke to her, but it's so funny. I remember we were in a restaurant with my Vietnamese friend, and she started speaking to the server in Vietnamese. And then he was like, oh, I'm Filipino. I don't speak Vietnamese.
Wow, that's so random.
It's
That's
definitely
so
easy
funny.
to do. So
Yeah, I do.
you're French Vietnamese. Now, we've talked about this before. Do you consider yourself Viet Q? Do you use that phrase? What's your interpretation of the phrase, or not the phrase, the label Viet Q?
So I used to come to Vietnam quite often, and I was labeled Viet Kieu, and for me the label in itself does not bother me. I do understand the baggage that it carries too, because like like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the Viet Kieu that would come to Vietnam, I'm generalizing here, didn't have the best of reputation, or or they didn't have the best of experience too. They were, like there was a lot of stories. So I understand, like, the legacy that it carries. Some people say now that, like, you're Vietnamese overseas, born overseas or something like this. I just say Viet Kieu, the Viet Kieu Fab, so it makes it faster. And it also depends on who I'm talking to, because I don't want to go too deep into my own story, because I even me, I'm very confused. I do not consider myself French 100% anymore, and I do not have a citizenship in a Canadian citizenship or anything like this, even though I lived there for 15 years, so most of my, like, adult life. So it's kind of weird. So I just say I'm Vic Fap, and like, the way I deal with this is I'm French when it fits me the best, I'm Vietnamese when it serves me the best, and I'm definitely Canadian when it serves me the best, and I use it on my own advantage at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I find it so fascinating. And we've obviously talked to many different people over the seasons from very similar backgrounds to yourself, but from different countries all over the world. And to me, for someone who's from a very homogenous society, I'm Scottish as far back as probably the Vikings. I grew up, knowing that I'm 100% Scottish and I'm nothing else. I think I can see the challenges of it, and I can also see how like it must be like really cool as well to sound like, I mean, that sounds like really like a lame way to put it. Like, it's cool. I don't mean to be like, oh, you're so cool, you're from different races or nationalities or whatever, but
yeah.
I mean, so to you, how is that being like you've got your foot in 3 different camps? And we've actually interviewed Anne-Sophie Hoffman, who's French, lived in and moved to Quebec and is now French Canadian. She's not Vietnamese, but she's like, I'm French and Canadian and French Canadian, and it's like this hybrid of different mentalities and things like that.
We'll be right back.
Join pilot and adventurer Fernando Pino as he takes you on journeys to discover exciting destinations across the UK and Europe. You'll fly with him to hidden gems and experience local culture, from bustling streets to serene hideaways and the best places to eat, sleep, and play. Travel Plans is more than a podcast. It's your ticket to exploring the world and its history with a friend. In this episode, we are flying to discover a beachside paradise perfect for the whole family. Discover golden sands, activities galore, and even free childcare so you get your own break too. Why am I still here?
Yeah. My identity crisis was pretty huge in the beginning of my 20s. I didn't know where to put myself, and because growing up in France, people, unfortunately, France is not the most welcoming place for immigrants. Very
Is
much
that
like
true? Is
England.
it
And
really? I
so,
don't really know that. Is
well,
that really true then?
my generation, so I'm 37, so like, basically, and then again, generalizing, but let's say that I grew up, so my teenagehood in Paris was, I couldn't avoid any type of arguments without someone reminding me that I was Asian and I had a small penis. So that was my upbringing. That was like the end of every argument. It's like,
Hmm.
and it wasn't even being Asian, it was being Chinese. Oh, you're Chinese, you have a small dick anyway, ching chong ching.
Oh
So
my
that was like
goodness.
that type of weird Stockholm syndrome where you live through it, and like, it's your normality. And as soon as I left to Canada, people were like, oh, you do sound French, and then you have that French mentality. And I was like,
Eh?
but who am I? Because I grew up in France. People told me that I was Chinese and I was definitely different, not from
Hmm.
France. Then I go to Canada and I'm trying to own up to that Asianness in me. And I went to ESL school to study English, and I met true Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, and Vietnamese from the motherlands. And everybody was like, yeah, you're definitely not Asian. Like, you don't, like, I had a very, I don't know, like, my sense of personal space was very French. So I would come and hug people. I would come and like give them kisses to say hello. And in Asia, you don't do this. In Vietnam, you don't come and hug people and be like, hello, and then kiss them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there was like this
I
weird
remember I
identity
remember I
crisis.
hugged a
Yeah.
girl one time, like a friend of a friend I got introduced, and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" Gave her a big hug, and I could feel her like freeze,
Yeah.
and like, and I had to ask my friend the next day. I was like, "I didn't mean to like, offend your
Yeah.
friend. Was she okay?" And she's like, "No, no, she understood." But like, yeah, I was like, I could feel her reaction, and it's so
Yeah.
I understand what you mean. It's a very different
Yeah.
culture here. But sorry to
It was
interrupt. Continue on what you're
it's
saying.
yeah, I'm the way, it's really easy to get into an identity crisis, especially if you're from an immigrant background, because especially from an Asian descent, like, because none of the groups were accepting or understanding of, the Asian, like Vietnamese or Chinese or Koreans don't understand immigration, because there is no immigration in Asia whatsoever.
Hmm.
And so the word Vikkeo at that time was more connotated as a traitor of the motherland. You left, like, it
Wow,
was
I
it was
haven't
there
had
was
that
that
one
that
before.
connotation, I think. And so if you let people define you, it becomes a problem, especially for your identity. Because so in my 20s, I was like, I'm nothing. I'm not from no country. I'm not Canadian. I'm not French. I'm
Hmm.
not. But I would pretend to be as French as I could be because people would see me like that. So suddenly I knew everything about wine. I knew everything about bread. When I grew up in a very Asian environment where it was like more about mukbang and rice. But as soon as I hit Canada, it was like, oh, but you're the French guy. And I was like, yes, I am the French guy. So let me tell you which wine to drink, which bread and which cheese. And I would like not know anything about it. So I pretended a lot. And then I
You're
realized
like,
that the best way to deal with this is just to accept that it's it's a positive just for me, like I'm gifted with different cultures, and nobody is going to be accepting it. And not a lot of people are not going to accept it, but I don't know if we can swear on the podcast, but F them.
yeah, yeah. That's so
But it
funny. I
took
can
me a
just
while. It took
imagine
me a
you with
while.
like I imagine you with like a glass of wine and smelling it and being like, yeah, no, this is a beautiful red wine, and that your friends like that's a white wine to I say.
that's vinegar. That's balsamic vinegar to AC.
Yeah. He's like, we gave you that for your bread.
Yeah.
So were your
Yeah.
parents immigrants from Vietnam directly, or like
Yes.
what's the background with that?
Yeah. So I come from, so my parents were not typical. They didn't come from the after war generation. So they were already on the move, or international students, let's say, before the war happened. So my father, when he got to France, he was a Buddhist monk that did his studies in India and New Zealand. And my mom, she passed when I was 6 years old, but she had a pretty wild life, a pretty crazy life. Actually, and I just discovered this 2 weeks ago, so this is an exclusive for your podcast. But my grandmother got her biography written here in Vietnam, and the book was released in 2015 or something like that. It was wildly popular in Vietnam. You can buy it in the library. So
Wow.
in it, it tells all of her life, how she met my grandfather, which was the first pharmacist in Paris, the first Vietnamese pharmacist in Paris. So high family, but all kind of fucked up stories, and how like my
Oh,
mom got abandoned by both of them, and like she had like mental health problems, and the book is wild. Like my girlfriend read it because I can't read Vietnamese, and she was telling me part of it, and it just triggered so many of my when I was 6 7 years old, and all this toxic environment, and it made me realize for the past couple of weeks it's also connected to why I got into drug addiction, and we'll talk about this later. But there was like this level of like of wildness in my family history, at least on my mom's side. There is like, I mean, there is a book that talks about it if you want to know more.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
that's
So the
crazy.
book was about your grandmother.
Yeah. So her whole life, and it's two books, and Tom 2 is mostly about my mom's life up until like from the day she was born up until like, unfortunately, my mom took her life. But all of this is written in the accounting of my grandmother, and so this is the weird type of ego boost, like in some of the movies where the hero find out there is a legend about him, and like he's the weird thing. Mine is this book where like my grandma told me how fucked up my life is actually, and how like
Wow,
it's so wild. It's so wild.
that is
Yeah.
absolutely wild. So, what? Why was there a book written about your grandmother?
Well, I guess like many grandparents, like their stories are fascinating, and I think she had the right connections, and she had the right. I feel like, and it's something that I've separated myself from my family. My family for me is only my father and my brother and my sister, really. And so I didn't know anything about my family, but like when I grew up, I would hear the stories, and I feel like every Vikio family have that. Like we're from a very important family, we're very affluent before the war, and things like this. And I was like, yeah, everybody says that, whatever. Like it's the immigrant tale. And then and
Oh,
then and then 2 weeks ago, I'm like, oh, there is an actual fucking book about it. And it's like, okay,
I
so apparently we were well connected. Yeah.
That's such a trip. Like, I cannot believe you've just
It's
found this out 2 weeks ago that it came out in
yeah.
2015. Did
Yeah.
you,
I mean,
and then having your girlfriend read it to you, was that like, was that with intrepidation? Were you worried? Were you scared? I'd
yeah,
be terrified to
I
hear what I'm about to read.
I was in a sense, and then it's I feel like it's the 'cause I believe in those things, so I feel like the universe is just putting this right now at the right time because I'm ready to deal with it. But the my half I have a half brother here. He was part of creating that book with my grandmother because he was still in touch with. We have the same mother. We had the same mother, and he told me about that book, but I was like, this is a part of my family that I don't know and I don't want to know about. He was like, yeah, but our mother is in the book in a few, but he doesn't read Vietnamese either. He's French too. And so he never read the book, and he just told me, yeah, there's a chapter about our mom. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't care about grandma, and I don't care about that book really. And I was still dealing with my thing. And so when my girlfriend started reading it, I was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting. Maybe she'll get a glimpse of why I am like this." And like and it's good to see for her to read about the old Vietnamese culture, and like about
Mm.
relationship, money, and everything, because she was a very typical Vietnamese lady of that time. But I didn't know that all of the second book was about my mom, and then it went deep, and it made me just think so much about the truth, especially when someone dies in a family. My grandmother wasn't here, and the way she describes my father, and the way she described the life that my mother had was like, it's a book, so it's fictionalized, and my dad is really depicted as the worst person on earth.
Oh
and so
no.
it was like, okay, so I had to sit down with my girl and be like, okay, there is different truth. There is my grandma's truth. There is
Yeah.
my father's truth. Then there is the real result, and the real truth that you can look at is the byproduct of all of this is the grandkids. So me, my sister, and my brother, and
Mm.
how we're living, and how good our mental health is, and how much love do we still share with our family. And this is the real, I feel like, the real truth, the only truth that you can look at least. And I was like, and if you look, there is some damage that has been done. So whichever truth you want to choose, for me, it's like, choose the one that will make me feel better at the end. So I mean, it's still a work in progress. I'll tell you in a month how I feel about all of
Oh, I'm
this.
sure, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, and obviously I'm no psychologist, so I'm one of these people. I don't like to give like false platitudes or false advice or be like, oh, it's gonna be okay. I have no idea how to react to what
Yeah,
you've just told me. I have no
yeah,
idea
yeah,
what to say to you, and I'm not gonna pretend that I do.
yeah,
That's pretty like heavy. Really,
yeah.
like I'm just again like that's gonna be. I'm just trying to think like, what if I'd found this book about my grandparents and found out all this
Yeah,
information
yeah,
and blah blah blah.
yeah.
Well, so let's go forward then from that and then say, so you left to go to Canada in 19, and
Yeah.
what made you
So,
do that then?
so I'll tell you I'll tell you the story with hindsight, because like at that time I did not know why I was doing what I was doing. I was just running away from life, trying to survive.
Yeah,
But
I
so
know what you
basically,
mean. Yeah.
yeah, it was just pretending. Like I was like pretending to be French, pretending to live, pretending to have some type of personality. But so after my mom passed, basically, when a mother passed, I suffered from a huge fear of abandonment, a huge fear of not being enough, obviously, because like your mom is not here, and why wouldn't she love you enough to stay for you? So that was the patterns that was having in my head. Then again, that's hindsight. Now I discovered it through my recovery, that all these patterns of thinking. And then my dad is and was pretty toxic too. He was very controlling, as any Asian father, but like he had a very gaslighty, very controlling, very toxic at the end of the day, where I would never equate to anything. I would always be, below him. No, none of his kids, like his most famous sentence was like, none of his kids is ever gonna be like him. Why none of his kids are gonna be, as good as him? You'll never do anything anyway. You'll be literally, he would say quite often, every time he would be upset, he would go, anyway, you're gonna be a drug addict and you're gonna have AIDS and you're gonna die. And I'm like,
Fucking
I'm
hell.
one AIDS
Holy
away to make
shit.
his wish come true. I just need to get AIDS, and dad, your wish come true.
Oh my goodness.
But so that was
Why?
the
Do you know
environment where I
why?
grew up.
I don't, I
Yeah,
mean, I don't understand human beings like at all. Like at
yeah,
all. So many things you hear about human beings, and I'm like, I don't understand why you would act like that or do like that. And there's just an infinite amount of examples. And so
yeah.
that's just another one. I'm very blessed in my life. I've not had anything like that. My family, I was going to say for all the faults, they really don't have really
Mhm.
any faults. They're amazing. And so
Yeah.
I'm very, very lucky in that sense. And so when I hear about this kind of behavior from anyone or anything, and I'm like, why would you do that? So do you have any idea of any sense from the
It's
book or from your own experience why they would act like that?
it's it again, with hindsight, I'm like, I think because my dad was quite the typical Vietnamese educated person, but it's still the same here in the Vietnamese culture. But there is nothing given to you for mental health tools. There is nothing given to you as like, here in Vietnam, when you have a mental health problem, you're crazy. Different, like
Mm,
that's how they label you. And so I feel like, with I try to be compassionate, and I'm like, okay, if I was an immigrant father that came with nothing, and I have three kids, and suddenly my wife passes, the love of my life, and I have to deal with those three kids. Like, so I would, just like when you're a hostage, you start like, you have that Stockholm syndrome, and you start like justifying
mm,
the toxic actions of someone, and obviously it's my dad, and it's like the only person that can love me at this point. So I'm like justifying everything he's doing. For me, that's normal, except like the repercussion on my body is like I was just like a frustrated little kid trying to live, and like, and teenage come in, and hormones shoots in, and I want to
mm,
have
mm,
girlfriends and things like this, and I can't do any of those. Very basic instinct at the end of the day, but I just wanted to live. And so at 19, I went to my dad, and I was like, fuck dad, like I can't live here anymore. I didn't give you any type of like teenage tantrum, but I have to get out. My sister was going wild, and I was just I just at that time I felt like running away would solve all of my problems. And I've done this a couple of times in my life where I was like, I'm just gonna change country. And I think like my fucking bag of shit is not gonna follow me. But
mm.
so at that time I was like, yeah, dad, I want to go to a Buddhist temple. Send me to a Shaolin temple at that, and I want to practice like kung fu and like go to China. And because I was so stupid at that time, I thought that was the only option that my dad would agree to, that I go and become a monk like him. Very, very,
Mm.
very first degree thing. And he was like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. But what about you go to Canada to study English because you're going to need English to succeed in life. Very Vietnamese typical like mentality. And I was like, whatever you want, man, as long as I'm not in this
Yeah.
house, I'm like, and so I went to study English in 2004. And then I was like, that's it. He gave me the occasion to stay in Canada. And I was like, I'm staying no matter what, because it was the first time that I was out of that environment. And I started living at 19, really. And I didn't, so there was most of my 20s, I pretended to leave. So most of my time in Canada, I was like, I pretended I was just surviving. I didn't know how to live, and I didn't have any tools to understand my emotions or to deal with my emotions. And so I remember I rushed into a relationship that lasted from 19 to 24 years old. And I was looking at it in hindsight, I was probably the most toxic fucking guy that this girl
Oh
ever met
no.
in her life. And I'm so sorry for her, again, in hindsight, because I was just
Yeah.
this weird copy of my father, but at the same time, this little abandoned kid that just was like, "Why do you love me? Are you sure you love me? No, you're gonna leave me." I was just a fucking toxic
Oh
guy.
no.
Yeah.
So you
So
felt like you'd kind of like, were mimicking your father at that point.
without knowing it, and because it's so weird how, like, especially when you're in a sensitive position, you copy what you've seen. And for me, when I started to be in relationships, when things didn't go my way, I would copy the only person that I've seen in relationship, which was my father. And even though the intention was to never become my father, in relationships, in the worst moments of my relationships, I became a copy of him. Super toxic, super, yes, super toxic. And
And
again,
then, so do you,
hindsight.
with hindsight, can you now think about how you then moved on from that?
Yeah. So the hindsight didn't come until the drug addiction. So I'm gonna fast forward. Like most
Okay.
of my 20s, if I may, most of my 20s, I pretended to live, and I ran away to Australia, thinking that I would find an answer to what was happening inside. Never picked up a book about mental health. Never picked up a book about self help or anything like this. I pretended a lot to know about everything. It was just insecure, full of insecurity, and then I got engaged. I got engaged in 2016 to this girl, and nothing made sense. Even like I couldn't even think of like getting married. I couldn't. And people ask me, but why are you getting married? And I was like, because it makes sense. But I couldn't make sense out of it in my head. I was so like conflicted. And I think at that time too, I was starting to have a very good position at my work. I was used to work at a tour company in Toronto. And then I had this fiance that fit all the social criteria, but I was so lost inside. And then my dad and my brother got into a huge argument in Paris, and I had to go back to kind of like mediate the whole thing. And then at that time, long story short, someone offered me crystal meth at a party, and I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm going to be that drug addict that my father wanted to be. And, I part of my personal story is I had a wild sexuality, and crystal meth was really helping with that at that time. And so when I got offered crystal meth again back in Canada, that's when I did it. I think it was in April 2017, and I was hooked. And it was like it was just bad. That's the only thing that I can say at this point. It was just bad. Where like the drug in itself, which I must say that don't do drugs, anybody. But the drug in itself allowed me to express my truth, because it gives you no fear. Like it removes the fear. It's a little bit like cocaine. And then I could be as myself as I wanted to be. But then the problem is I could be as bad as I wanted to be. And then there was this whole side of Tue-Si that was hidden for so many years, because I was living through my insecurities and my fears. So when the crystal meth came in, there was this whole side of me that just went like, I exist and I'm just the worst motherfucker in the world, and like, all the dirty side of me and all the good. So all the good and the bad came out, and I think most of the bad came out first. Yeah.
Now, what you'd mentioned this to me before is,
Mhm.
so you were a high functioning drug addict, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
the kind of common misconception on the media anyway, I guess,
Mhm.
or the kind of movie portrayal of a drug addict is is someone who's living under a bridge or is in this abandoned house, and you know, and obviously at the far end of drug addiction that can happen. Like that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so you hear the words crystal meth, and that you think of someone with no teeth and blah blah blah. And then obviously I can see you right now, a very handsome man, have all your own teeth. I think I don't know if it's your own teeth,
no,
but you
they're
have
all
beautiful
fake,
teeth. They're all fake.
No, they are. Yeah.
So explain then, I guess, a little bit about that for anyone that's listening. So what does that mean? Like, even when you first mentioned it to me when we talked before, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I was addicted to crystal meth," and I was like, "Wait, what?" Because it just didn't really compute.
Yeah.
Because I guess what we hear and see in society or in the media or whatnot, what does that mean? And how are you able to be a functioning crystal meth user? Because I've never tried it, full disclosure, so I have no idea what it feels like. My other question as well, which you could follow up on, is it must be bloody good though. That's what I always think about that. If you're a heroin addict or you're a crystal meth addict, like it has to be good. Otherwise you wouldn't do it that much. But I don't know, maybe explain to me, maybe it's only good the first time and then after that you're just trying to recreate that high. I don't know. So you can talk about any of those subjects that I've just thrown at you.
First, thanks, because I've very seldomly talked about this whole period, or I'm more in control of the narrative when I do so. But first, when I say I'm a high functioning addict, it's me saying that truth. But you should talk to my coworkers and see if they saw that way at that time.
They'll be listening to this and they'll be like, he was not high functioning at all.
No, one of the comparisons, because I came out to my staff in 2018. After 1 year of doing it, I sat down with most of them, the owner of the company, and I told them, I've been doing crystal meth for 1 year every day. Actually, at the beginning, the really stupid joke that I was trying to make is like, hey guys, so I have to tell you this, like I've been doing this thing for the past year. It's this white crystal, and you know, as soon as you take it, like you're hooked, and like, you know, it gives you really high highs and really low lows, and 60% of North America is addicted to it, and like, you know, and it's sugar. And then people were like, what are you talking about, Tue-Si? I thought you were talking about crystal meth. I was like, no, but I was trying to compare it, so like it doesn't sound as bad, like, you know. I was like, and I was really dedicated to that joke. And I was like, but do you see, like, sugar is the big evil here, and people didn't get it. And I was like, okay, fuck it, like, but so I told everybody, and then I remember one of my coworker and very good friends, still my friend, he was like, I knew something was up, man, because I saw you, like, you know, a few months back, and the best way I could describe you was, you watched Stranger Things?
The first 2 seasons, and then I gave up on it.
You only need to watch the first season. But you remember Winona Ryder when she's scratching on the walls trying to find her kid, and she's all like jittery, and she's like, he's in there. So I would describe myself as a high functioning addict. He would describe me as this, and I feel like the truth is more to his side.
But you were still able to keep your job for a year, doing it every day. And so, again, so to me, I just don't understand that kind of concept of, like, I mean, for me, I wouldn't, like, I couldn't even have more than like a beer or I just couldn't really function on any type of alcohol or anything. And you're not the only person. I've heard this in media or whatever. I don't really know many people, but, you know, people talk about being able to work with drug addictions, and I'm just like, how do you do that?
It's I don't think you plan for it. I think it's more survival kicking in, and like me not having it at that time. Obviously, the drug addict has no discipline. I had no discipline of life. I'm not the guy that I'm today with, like, my routines and all those things. And for me, it was like, as soon as I did it, and like as soon as, for some reason, I did it for 3 days straight, and like there was a big problem in my relationship at that time. And I was like, how am I going to go to work? I have all those responsibilities. So I started doing it at work as a crutch. And then and then you enter that super vicious circle of like, yeah, but like, if I stop now, then I'm going to have the biggest of come down. And so I need to do some more. And then obviously, because again, or at least in my experience, like, you know, there is that ego that kicks in, obviously, because it's fed by crystal meth that goes, I can handle it. I will handle it. And because I had the money to handle it, I handled it. But, you know, and it's like, it's also in realizing in hindsight again that people don't give a fuck really about you. Like, like even if you say that you have a problem, you have to ask for the proper help, and you have to be ready to receive that help for people to actually give a shit. If not, they don't. Like, everybody has their own problem. Like, they're like, oh, Tue-Si, you're addicted to crystal meth. Good for you. I have my own problems, at the end of the day. So as long as you can keep your work and you can be as productive as you can be, if you're telling me that you're going to be okay, then I'm going to trust you, because that's the way it is at the end of the day. And then a few of my friends came in, did some intervention, but at the end, even after I came out, I probably stopped for a week and a half, and then I started doing it in secret again. And up until I came to Vietnam, and so up until I came to Vietnam, and then I relapsed. So there was a whole process to it. The high functioning addict. I say that I was a high functioning addict because the result was I worked while on meth. The funny thing too. So the story that I had. So I there was this girl that I've met, and obviously she came. I wasn't the best person. Like I obviously we did meth together, and so she took a puff of it, and then she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, this is so weird. This is very familiar, the feeling." And I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of weird. Like, oh, I guess she's done drugs before or anything like this." And then she comes back the week after, and she puts her ADHD pills on the table, and she goes, "This was the feeling that I've had." And so with a little bit of research after this, and I remember this was July 2018, it was like, I looked at it. And so if you look at Adderall, Vyvanse, and all those ADHD pill, it's all derivative of amphetamine. And so methamphetamine is also a derivative of amphetamine. And so at some point when I was trying to quit meth, I would take Vyvanse. So I would pop 2 pills in the morning and go to work, and it would give me the same, literally the same. And I've met, in my tribulation in the world of addicts, I've met so many people that switched from their ADHD pills to like street drugs because it was cheaper. It's more accessible, actually. So this was the wild realization. So obviously after this, I went like, okay, there must be a reason why, when I wasn't doing anything stupid when I was high on crystal meth. I would read books, I would work, and I would be so focused. So I went and I did the ADHD test, and I was like, yeah, 10 out of 10. Yay. So that was the reason why also crystal meth was was this blessing in
It was
disguise.
self-medicating, basically.
Yeah, it was like this weird thing where it taught me discipline in some ways because it focused me. So basically what it did for me was like, because usually when you do crystal meth, you do those things for stupid things. So you're stuck focused on that stupid thing for 8 hours at a time. And then if you smoke more, so it's a never ending. So if it's sex for 8 hours. If it's porn for 8 hours. If it's just reading books, it's books for 8 hours. So you're focused on one thing for 8 hours. And that's why in so many university in the States now, like people are popping Adderall like crazy, like in finances.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And so, and literally, like I do not promote any of those. And if you popped Adderall before, you've done meth for me, because it's the exact same feeling, except it's more socially acceptable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So to get away from, let's get this clear, to get away from your drug addiction to crystal meth, you thought the best idea was to come to Vietnam.
Yeah. That's the beginning. That's a good joke.
I mean, I don't, as I mentioned, I've never done crystal meth,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure I know exactly where I could go and get crystal meth right now in Saigon if I really wanted it.
Yeah.
It's a street that begins with B and V, and it would probably take about half a block before I would get it, because I've been walked down that street many times. I've been offered many things. So why did you think, so apart from obviously being Q Vietnamese overseas, having Vietnamese parents, what made you come to Vietnam to escape that addiction? And then you obviously mentioned that you relapsed, but from our previous conversations, that's not been an ongoing thing. So
the wild bet that I've made, because so when I came out the first time and I hit that first rock bottom, I was like, okay, there's only 2 ways to go at this point. Now that I've lost my social image, everybody knows that I'm this weird guy doing crystal meth. I can whether end up, poster boy for crystal meth addiction, and I start losing my teeth and I start scratching myself, or I go and find out why this whole shit is happening to me. And so I started studying, like learning, reading books, and like meeting the right people, like, and trying to figure my shit out. And so the wild bet that I've made was like, Vietnam is going to be the place that will allow me to afford a healthy lifestyle. And that was a really wild bet, because any type of rehab, like, so there is the government rehab in Canada where you go in, they pump you full of pills, and then they release you in the wild, and then you relapse. Like, I've seen so many of my acquaintances of that time that went to rehab, and they were hooked on pills by the time they got out, and they didn't. And it's like they look at the drugs as the reason for the crime, but they don't look at the motives inside, like, the emotional baggage and all of this. So nothing was. And so a proper rehab is like $50,000 in Canada. And I was like, I'm pretty sure for that same budget, if I come to Vietnam, I can afford a healthier lifestyle in my own accord. And so I came in with all that, this beautiful speech, and me knowing everything about addiction because I read a book about habits and and the power of now.
While you were on crystal meth for 8 hours.
I was like, I know everything.
I'm gonna take some I'm gonna take some crystal meth, and I'm gonna read this book about how to not take crystal meth.
It's so wild. And so I came, and I remember talking to my friend Sabrina, and I was like, yeah, so I've been addicted to crystal meth, and I'm here in Vietnam to quit it, and I'm going to get my life back together. And she looked at me at some point, and we're sitting at this bar, like not so far from Bui Vien. And she goes, Tue-Si, do you know how easy it is to find drugs in Vietnam? And I go, no, but tell me more. So like I heard that, and I was like, yeah, but no, it's okay. Like, at that time I was so motivated, but obviously at the first emotional low, it's true, it took me literally 25 minutes from me feeling not so good about myself, feeling like having that fear of dying alone again, like, this very, very unsettling feeling, to having crystal meth in my head. And to 25 minutes, literally 25 minutes. And I can still remember.
It's crazy. So I've read this before. There was an amazing 3-part miniseries with Benedict Cumberbatch, and I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head. It came out a couple of years ago, and it was like a biopic of this guy who'd been a drug addict. And the first episode is basically him going to New York to a party, and just how quickly, when he'd not even from New York, and once he decided he wanted drugs, he could just find it like that. And I think it was Russell Brand talked about it as well. And he's like, if you're a drug addict, you can find drugs like immediately, like 25 minutes is all you need. Yeah. And for someone who's not a drug addict, you're like, how the hell would you find drugs in 25 minutes? But I mean, I can understand it.
It's crazy. But like, and I didn't know that either until and Russell Brand, bless his soul, his book was a big help in my recovery. He has a book called Recovery, actually. Beautiful book for anyone that is dealing with any type of addiction. I highly recommend the audiobook. It really soothed many of my nights, like, trying to figure shit out. But no matter where I was, actually, once I started doing crystal meth, whether it was Paris, Toronto, Vietnam, or anything like this, once you're into that world, you realize, shit, just in my building, there is at least 3 people doing some type of drugs. And that was it.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Whether it's weed, cocaine, meth, there is going to be someone in your building right now, in your building. There is someone doing crystal meth. I can guarantee you this.
That's
so
an
wild.
interesting point, right?
Yeah. And then you don't notice this until you notice this. And then when you notice it, you're like, oh shit, like, all the, even like, like if you're an entrepreneur and like you're in the hustle and you're like living the fast life, you're whether on cocaine, Adderall, crystal meth, you have something in your system to be able to sustain this amount of work. I'm generalizing again. I would say like 90% of that, like,
probably
there is something. And it takes discipline and practice to get out of all of that. Yeah.
So the other point that you've made is, which I find only hilarious in hindsight, because probably before I'd ever lived here, I would be like, yeah, totally. But you came to Vietnam for a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah.
What did you want, like MSG and just like rice. It's just like your diet is like, I'm going to come for a healthy diet of
Yeah,
MSG. Now,
yeah.
I'm obviously being a bit facetious. You can have a very healthy lifestyle here in Vietnam, absolutely.
Yeah,
But you can also have an unhealthy lifestyle as well.
It can be a trap. It's whatever you want to put it in, like which effort you want to drive in. But like, I came 5 years ago to Vietnam, and I wanted to live in Vietnam, and I left after 10 days because I was not ready to have a healthy lifestyle. I literally went drinking for 10 days straight, and I was trying to hook up with girls and like feed my ego and things like this. And it was like, shit, no, like that's not a healthy lifestyle. But there was, and I mean, like, I have a healthy lifestyle today, so I'm like, yeah, I'm the proof that you can do it. It's not as easy as Tue-Si thought in 2019. It's definitely not. Yeah.
So how did you then finally kind of turn that round? And so how long have you been sober in terms of crystal meth? I don't know if you drink or whatnot.
I think I had like, because I track all my habits now. So I became this robot. A lot of people are laughing at me. So the way I got out of this, first, it was like acknowledging that and that's on a more serious note. The problem of addiction for many is the inability of letting go of something. Like we want to stay in control even of our high, and so we can't let go of our problems or anything like this, and we don't know who to let go to, and we don't know how to ask for help, and we don't even know what discipline or what route to take, to get out of it. We can know some informations, but at the end of the day, you have to take it day by day. It's always one day at a time. If you go from the 12 steps program, it's always a day at a time. And so at my second relapse, that's when I already met my girlfriend of the moment. And I remember doing it in front of her, and she looked at me, and she was like, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here to support you. But are you sure that's the life that you want? Like, are you sure this is the fucking life that you want? Like, there is all the beautiful words that you tell me, and then there is the actuality of your actions. And then there was this moment of growth, I think, where I looked at myself and I was like, do I want to justify my actions again? Because I can justify them saying like, I'm going to be a high functioning addict to it. I still have friends that are like, doing tons of cocaine and justify their lifestyle because they have the money to do so, and they're getting, all those things. And I was like, do I want to go and justify and bring this girl into this weird world? Or do I want to actually put, like, walk the walk and actually take responsibility and accountability for what I'm doing with my life? And I think it took tremendous effort to not go down the dark path again. And I was like, fuck, she's right, and then she's much younger than me. So like we're 13 years apart. And I was like, yeah, I owe it to myself first, and I owe it to her to not fuck up. Even when I said that, like, 2 weeks after I relapsed again, because it's really, really fucking hard. And then, so I had to go back to all the knowledge that I had, and I worked in tourism a lot. And the only time that I had a good day, when I look back, is the day when I was a tour guide and I had an itinerary well traced. I knew I was going to wake up at 7. I knew I had breakfast at this time. I knew I had to go there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do one itinerary for my day every day. And that's how I started this whole system that I'm coaching right now, where, like, people are talking about it. They created this, but it's called the Life Operating System. And that's exactly what I have right now. So I have this daily checklist of habit tracking, journaling, and financial tracking. And then in the week, I sit down with my girlfriend and we have this weekly review for 2 hours, and everything is well regulated now. And then for me, it's super important because, again, like, I'm going to be an addict my whole life. And that's the way, like, it's really dangerous, especially for addictive personality, to say, I'm a recovered addict. It's much easier to say I'm going to be an addict all my life, and it's one day at a time. So that's how I approach it.
And that's Russell Brand kind of has that mantra, right? And I've heard him talk about that. He's like, I am an addict.
Yeah.
And it's actually interesting you brought that up, because my next question was going to be, do you consider yourself an addict? Because there's a famous comedy duo in the UK called Badil and Skinner. And I saw them being interviewed for the Euros last year, and they were kind of reminiscing about the last time England did well in the Euros and blah, blah, blah. And it's always stuck with me. I think about this often. So the guy, David Baddiel, turned around to Frank Skinner and went, oh yeah, and remember, you were an addict you were an alcoholic back then. And he immediately just went, no, I'm still an alcoholic. I just don't drink. And I was like, wow, they're like best friends. And I was like, your best friend just like fucked that up. Like that, you're always an alcoholic. You're never like, So but I thought it showed you, he was obviously, I think he's been sober for a very long time. And just the way he just looked at him and he was like, no, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah. For me, it's like when I say this now, contrary to how I would speak to myself back in the days, I say this with a lot of self-love and compassion for myself, compassion, where I'm like, yes, unfortunately the way I grew up made me an addict. And
you can understand why.
And now that I understand my life, and I'm still understanding it, obviously this book just dropped on me 2 weeks ago, so I'm still processing things. But the good thing about it is I can see the evolution of who is Tue-Si, and I'm like, I am an addict is not the only sentence that is going to define me anymore. I am Tue-Si that knows now how to love himself, that knows now how to forgive himself, and that knows. I mean, like if this book dropped 3 years ago, I think I would be deep in a cave doing some stupid shit, like, trying to hurt myself because I didn't know how to express anything. But now I'm like, okay, I need after my girl talked to me about the book, I was like, I think I'm gonna go to the beach for a week by myself, and I'm just gonna go and write and process my feelings. And so that's the good thing about this is, yes, I am an addict and I will be an addict, and I'm not because I'm scared to relapse. It might not happen, but at least I know for myself that the relapse is not going to be as intense, or it's not going to have the same meaning. And I do have a system in place now that will allow me to, because it's only for me, it's a very selfish reason, that will allow me to rediscipline myself, to take accountability right away, and to be responsible for my own life, because I'm not expecting anyone to do it for me anymore. And so that's the beautiful thing about this, of like, you can choose the words to label yourself. And I do have the system now to also, deal with it. Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's beautiful. And I'm glad you're healthy and happier now and can deal with this stuff, because it's a lot to take on. And just well done. And let's give a big shout out to your girlfriend, because for someone who's 13 years your junior, she sounds like a very wise person.
I mean, I love her. I don't think she was wise or anything. She literally said the truth. She's like, I don't understand what the fuck is going on, but you look like shit, so deal with it. And I didn't need anyone to understand. I just needed support, and just someone to tell me the fucking truth and be like, yo, get your shit together, and she was there at the right time, giving support. So but shout out to her.
The truth is wisdom. That is being wise if she's giving you the truth, and that's what you need, right? Because because it's the opposite, right? Think of the opposite as your friend being like, "No, man, you're good. Just have another one. We'll be fine. Let's go out tonight. Come on, we're going out." Like that's the opposite, right? So having someone to actually just be like,
I do.
There you go. So
I have a couple friends. Sorry, I cut you off, but I have a couple friends, couple of acquaintances. I'm very, very dedicated at about boundaries, and I won't mention their name, but I have a few friends that
you don't want to call them a friend yet. You're like, they're acquaintances. They're not friends. We're not that. We've not put an official label on our friend relationship yet. We're just acquaintances.
I have acquaintances that I know for a while now that knew about because they're high functioning addict, and they call me every 6 months or things like this, and they go like, "Hey, how are you, Tue-Si? Oh, I'm so happy you're doing all right. You're doing all right, huh? You didn't relapse." And like in their tone, it's like they want me to relapse in a way, and I'm trying to separate myself from all of this, because they're like, that would justify their own lifestyle, and I'm like, I'm calling them out a little bit. And like they're like, "Yeah, I'm doing cocaine all the time. It's fine, Tue-Si. You can have that lifestyle, but I'm so happy you're doing all right. Yeah, don't do any drugs. But are you?"
Yeah, they gotta like justify what they're doing, because if you're doing it as well, they can go back to everyone else, be like, "Yeah, Tue-Si's doing it as well. Come on, let's go do more cocaine. Everyone, let's celebrate."
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna wrap up now. Thank you so much. This has been so amazing. I absolutely love doing these podcasts, because getting to know people and tell their story and know more about them. It's literally why I started back in 2019. Is just like this episode. Every episode is an example of it. Yeah. This one is just a perfect example, because we've come across each other. I've been on your podcast. Lots of people would know who Tue-Si is because you're on the podcast, know your name. And when we met, you just kind of casually dropped. You were like, "Oh yeah, I was a high functioning drug addict." And I was like, "Wait, what?" But to then come on here and share your story, this was the reason, because why I started this podcast, because everyone does have a story. And
Yeah.
and I've realized more and more that we don't, myself included, this is one of the reasons why I absolutely loved being on your podcast. We don't get the chance to share those stories with other
Exactly.
people, really, because most of our relationships are pretty superficial. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you know, how often do you sit down with a friend and have like a real in-depth conversation? And I've mentioned it before, you know, like Lewis Wright and Kim Nguyen, two of our best friends in the world.
Yeah.
And they were on this podcast in the very beginning as a test episode, and it ended up becoming episodes. I've probably never still to this day had as much of an in-depth conversation with them as I had in that moment. And so being able to talk at an in-depth level, share these stories, I appreciate that you feel comfortable enough to come on and do this and share it and let people know. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
So we're going to finish up with the final questions that I ask everyone at the end of an episode, and then they're different for season 8. So this is episode 2.
Yeah.
So as many people know, the borders are finally opening here in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Life is slowly getting back to normal, which is amazing. But if you could travel anywhere in Vietnam for a week, where would you go and why?
I think for 1 week. Can I give you 2 locations?
No, you're gonna go one place. You're gonna stay there for a week. Why would you go there?
Fuck. Okay, so it has to be a location that I've already been to, and I think I would pick.
Not necessarily.
I would be too scared to have a bad experience. A place that I think I would go to the beach anyway. Like right now, my first reaction, and I told you, like I want to go to the beach anyway to process all my.
Yeah.
But I think I would go to Da Nang, really. Da Nang or Hoi An? Hoi An, I think. Hoi An.
Just so you know, Da Nang doesn't have a beach. Oh no, Da Nang does have a beach. I thought you said Dalat. I was about to say like Dalat doesn't have a beach.
No.
Da Nang does have a beach. All
Oh,
right,
very
so
beautiful.
Da Nang, Hoi An. All right,
Yeah,
they
Da
are
Nang,
a
Hoi
beautiful
An, yeah.
spot, definitely.
I'm
All right,
planning, yeah.
what advice would you give to someone thinking about moving to Vietnam?
I don't think. Just do it. Just do it. Like you don't want to be 4 years old looking back at I mean, depending on what age, any age, you don't want to go down 10 years down the road and look back and be like, I had the chance to be in Vietnam and I didn't do it. And that's the number one advice that I would give anyone in tourism is like, just fucking do it. I mean, especially after COVID right now, if it's reopening, don't take traveling for granted. Don't take those opportunities for granted at all.
Yeah.
You have the chance.
Yeah, that's
get
a
it.
good point. Do not take anything for granted. Just do it.
Yeah.
Now, one of the next question is, what advice would you give to a tourist coming to Vietnam for the first time?
Be very clear about what type of experience you want to have and how far you're willing to go. Like if it's like a healthy experience or an unhealthy experience, because Vietnam can bring you to the depth of everything or to the highest of all. So prepare a little bit of preparation and the right environment. Yeah.
Were you never inspired to go to like Bali or something like that, do the whole eat, pray, love thing? But I'm sure in Bali you could equally get drugs in 25 minutes as well if you want to.
Most likely. I've never thought about this. Vietnam was my only choice, to be very honest with you, because there was the ease of being able to speak at least. And there is. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So this is a topic that comes up often. What do you think is the difference between an expat and an immigrant?
I love that question. I used to be really big in Toronto in the expat community, and so for us, and I feel like it's for lack of better word, it's a Caucasian versus the rest of the world type of discussion, where for me it's because I was labeled an immigrant for so long. For me, it doesn't bother me, even with the Western culture, to be like, yeah, I'm an immigrant to Vietnam, an immigrant to Canada, because it's like reappropriating that word that was negatively labeled to my father and my parents and things like this, like, oh, those immigrants. And in the same way, I understand why, Caucasians or like, people non from immigrants background do not want to be labeled immigrants. And I feel, and so I'll tell you a real story about this. Is I'm helping this company. I'm consulting. That's one of the things you wanted to know. To Coach-sultant is just coach and consultant.
Well, I figured that it's not really difficult to figure out. Well, we were going to talk more in depth about it, but we can make that one another episode.
We basically like I'm consulting his business, and it was his Facebook group for the longest was called like the group for successful immigrant to Canada, and literally there was no traction, because all the French people, Caucasian French people, would not want to be immigrants. And then so literally at the end we had to change the name to expat, successful expat in Canada. And then suddenly people started signing up to it. And it's because, so at the end of the day, like the battle is lost. Expat sounds better, yes, to immigrants. And I understand at this point, I'm not going to battle it. In technicity, I think an expat is someone that is sent to another country by his company. And that's technicals, but whatever.
I definitely agree. Like, the words have been, weaponized or denigrated, whatnot. And immigrant has been used as a negative context, for sure. But for me, and especially in the context of being in Vietnam, and I talked about this before, essentially for me, the definition is the difference between either being sent by your company or coming to work for a short or an indefinite amount of time, versus an immigrant by definition is someone who immigrates to another country. So this is where I get a bit, where I have an opinion on it, is when people, especially here in Vietnam, are like, oh, why do they call them expats? Why are they not immigrants? Well, it's like, well, because they're not immigrants. They haven't immigrated to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. They're an expat, whether they're white or whatever race or color they are. They're an expat. They've come here for a job for a ill-defined period of time. They're not an immigrant. So I think some people, I have a big bugbear over the last year with people virtue signaling, and it's just become such a big problem. I think especially in Vietnam, people just love to virtue signal. At the first drop of a penny, they're like, I'm going to virtue signal and tell you why I'm so virtuitous. And so when I hear people say like, oh, it's a race thing, and I don't think that the why you're labeled it as a race thing, I think it can be used as in a negative term because of race. But in terms of the definitions of the word, that's my kind of thinking on it.
Yeah. Again, it's it's the same with the identity crisis, and like labeling someone from just a country, or you're Scottish, or you're something like that. It's like, once you're settled with who you are, for me it doesn't matter. Like, you want to call yourself an expat or an immigrant, it doesn't matter for me. Like, it depends on how you use it. Like, if it's out of a little bit of like ego or weakness, and you're like, no, I'm an expat, I'm not, it doesn't matter at the end. It's like, how good do you feel about yourself? It's like, just use whatever you want. So I'm okay with any.
Now, final question. If Vietnam was a person, how would you describe them?
I was thinking about it. As soon as I saw it, I was like, fuck, how do you... I used to describe Vietnam as white noise, but that's not a person. So the way I would definitely... ADHD came to my mind.
All right, so Vietnam definitely has ADHD.
Vietnam has
absolutely
ADHD.
True. Okay, yeah.
And then also Vietnam.
Maybe a meth addict then.
Vietnam is also a country that, I mean, it's generalizing, but the word gaslight came to my mind too. Like, the way they talk in the culture is like very gaslighty. Sometimes it's like, my truth, and like, you're crazy and things like this. But overall, Vietnam as a person is a very nice person.
Whereas ADHD and gaslight. No, so I mean, I don't speak the language, but I think in terms of the gaslighting, I've heard this of examples before. Would I be correct then in saying what you kind of mean though is like people can be very indirect here? Is that what you would mean by gaslighting? So they'll tell you one thing, but they mean something completely different.
So if that, or they will enforce. I mean, like, like if you look at the definition of gaslighting, and you talk to anybody and about their family interaction, and I can see from my girlfriend's interactions with her grandma and things like this, it's like, maybe because it's coming from that definition that I have, a more snowflakey definition of gaslighting, but it's sometimes it's like, like, if you had this in Canada, that's like pure out like gaslighting. It's like, I obviously I don't have an example in my mind right now, because like I'm
I was just about to say, give me an example.
But I'm like, sometimes like, they're like, the way they talk to each other, or the way they enforce their truth, and like, you're crazy, or like, like that fake pretense. I mean, that's the older generation, but they pretend to know everything. I've met a lot of people that know everything. Yeah, I know this, I know that, and there is no, and then they enforce that truth or that knowledge onto their kids. Very, very, very weird.
Well, would this be a good example of gaslighting? You must have seen it, and I've seen this several times, where girls especially are advertising for fake Western boyfriends to bring home to their family for tet.
Yeah.
Have you seen this before?
Yeah,
They'll literally pay a Western guy to come home with them to their hometown for tet and pretend that they're their boyfriend, just to gaslight their family that they've got this like Western boyfriend.
Yeah, or it's a byproduct also. Like, I mean, of the gaslight, like, it's generational trauma. It's like, it's passed on. It was like, it's so wild. Like, I've never heard of this, but I can imagine it. Like, and I mean, it's a growing culture. It's a growing country, and it's a post-war mentality is all about the survival of the appearance and the honor. And like, my father was all about like, do whatever you want, but do not touch the image of the family or the honor of the family. And it was like, and so, yeah, it led to a lot of toxic behaviors. But in general, Vietnam,
and it is something that it is something I think is very different between Western cultures and Eastern cultures, Asian cultures. It sounds a horrible thing to say, but I don't think we have family honor. Not in my family. Like, that's never once been said. Like, you're going to uphold the family honor. Like, you represent the family. Like, I mean, every family's different, so maybe other families are like that. But I don't know any of my friends. I don't know anyone who was ever told, like, you have to uphold the family name. It's just like, go do what you want. Go be you. You know what I mean? There's nothing.
I feel you, man. I in high school, the first time that I've seen one of my white friend just fucking shouting to his parents, like, I don't care about you, dad. Like, anyway, I want you to die so I can get like your heritage and shit like this. So I was like, you can talk to your parents like this? What the fuck? Like, oh my lord. It's like, if I like, even if my tone went that up and I would be just like, hey dad, I would just die on the spot. Like, I would just like, and so for me it was just like culture shock. Oh, you can talk like this. It's like, or like this mother getting remarried, and like my friend is talking to his stepdad, and I was like, you're not my dad anyway, fuck off, like, in his room, and like, and we're 14, and I'm like, oh lord, like, like, hey. You don't do this in Vietnam. Not yet. Not yet.
I don't think ever. Well, Tue-Si, thank you so much. It's been amazing to talk to you. Before you go, just tell people quickly about your Coach-sultant business. How can they find you? Where can they follow you on Instagram? And tell us just quickly, where can they listen to Creators in Vietnam podcast?
So I'll talk about the podcast first, because that's the most important. I really want people to get into podcasting in Vietnam and listen to us. So Creators in Vietnam, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, but obviously Anchor and all the platform, actually Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So Creators in Vietnam, like you said, Creators in Vietnam. We're trying to release one episode every week. So if you know anybody that is a good fit and would like to, is creating a positive impact here in Vietnam, then I would love to have them on the podcast. If you want a good taste of the podcast, then listen to Niall's episode. That's a very good example of what we're doing with the podcast. For the coaching, what I do is I coach people in life operating systems. So I teach them through an app called Notion how to install the proper life systems. So like habit tracking and task management and all those things. So it's a very comprehensive system. And then for the consulting, I do business consulting for small to medium-sized business, and it's all about operations and process. Overall, I'm just a fun guy to hang out with. So if you, this year is more me trying to get out of my rehab period and connect with more people. So if you're listening to this and you want to talk to me, just, reach out, and I'll be more than happy to just start meeting people again.
Awesome. And we're going to get you up on stage soon for comedy, because you've said that you want to do stand. You said you've done it before, right? You did an open mic before?
When I was in ESL school, it was like my final challenge. I was like, I'm going to go and do a stand-up comedy in English, so it will mean that my English is good. And then I was so insecure about myself that I've never done it. But I think I lost funny Tue-Si through the addiction, but I think it's there somewhere. So I want to reignite that something. We'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to look out for it soon. And just remember as well, your English is better than mine, and it's not even your first language. So
you.
You can definitely do stand-up comedy, no problem.
Thank you.
Tue-Si, amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on, and I will see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon, Neil. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of a Vietnam podcast by 7 Million Bikes. We hope you enjoy hearing our guest stories. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you so much to Lewis Wright, who made the 7 Million Bikes music and continues to support us in every way. Also to our audio engineer, Luke Digweed, for making sure each episode sounds amazing for you. Also, a big thanks to the 7 Million Bikes community. Thank you so much. It's amazing to get to know you guys. It's amazing to see how much we're growing, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event. You can join the community today. The link is in the description of the show. You'll get free tickets to 7 Million Bikes events, episodes before anyone else, and extra special bonus content only for you, and invites to special member-only events. You will also obviously be providing massive support so that we can keep sharing people's stories with you on a Vietnam podcast. Also, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember, we have 7 seasons of stories to share with you. So check them out if you haven't already, and we hope you can listen to future episodes too, so you can laugh, connect, and discover. Cheers! I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you are listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.